Teaching to Transgress, Hooks draws us into the narratives of a teacher with radical and progressive ideas about racism, sexism, class elitism, and more. Within this narrative, Hooks urges us as teachers to remember that our students are holistic beings, meaning they have bodies, minds, and spirits. They have jobs, hobbies, interests, and careers outside of the classroom. Hooks reminds us that as teachers, we have bodies, and our bodies represent part of our social location. Salient attributes like race, gender presentation, class are visible to our students. Hooks asks us to remove the barrier of the podium between teacher and student, to step away from the podium, reach out into the classroom, and walk around so that our students may experience us fully. She says so they may be familiar with our smell, our movement, our sound. We are urged as teachers to address progressive, liberal, and radical change in our pedagogy, rather than slip in a little bit of change here and there and ignore the full embodiment of people and change that we bring to our classroom. For example, when I walk into a classroom as a professor, lecturer, visitor, I walk in with my status and my degrees. I walk in with my history, my trauma. Visually, I walk in with my clothes, my fashion. I walk in with my race, my light skin, my light eyes, my light hair. I walk in with every privilege that comes with American whiteness. I walk in with my experiences as a woman, as a disabled person. But I also approach my students' experiences. I approach their assumptions, their beliefs, their social locations within the classroom. And together in this classroom, we engage in a divine dance of transgression from traditional, educational, banking, and pedagogy. So, rather than give a lecture about the brilliant, intellectual, progressive ideas written by a Black feminist theorist, poet, writer, and cultural leader, I will engage us in a practice of embodiment. By engaging in embodiment, orienting, and mindfulness practices, we as teachers begin to notice what our bodies bring into the classroom and how we can engage with our students, with our whole body, our whole self, our presence, our spirit, and thus allowing and making room for our students, respecting with empathy the whole body and whole mind and whole spirit of each student. Not to mince words, but Hooks says that it is unfair for teachers to be separated academic minds stationed in the front of the classroom behind a podium, or the back of the classroom safely behind a desk, stiffly demanding vulnerability and honest engagement from our students, while as educators, we don't offer them the same thing. This book is filled with stories and interviews between Hooks and authors, workshops between Hooks and Paulo Freire, discussions between herself and other Black feminists to help engage the reader, whether the reader is a teacher, student, or both, in critical inquiry over what it means to be a teacher and educator. I invite you to join me in an orienting practice meant to improve our embodied space. Let us begin. Using your eyes, I want you to become curious about the space you're in. You might slowly look around you, noticing colors and shapes. As you're ready, open your ears. Notice any sounds, those in the distance, those nearby. Without searching, simply let these sounds come to you, allowing them to move through your awareness. Notice any temperature along your skin, any sensations of your clothing, becoming attuned to whatever is most present with openness and curiosity. When you are ready, come back to our space, and we will begin our agreements to build education as freedom classrooms. We must respect students and teachers as holistic beings and agree to celebrate similarities and differences. In this class, we agree to equal time to share and honoring time boundaries. We bring vulnerability, room to share your truth, and to lean in and listen to the truth from others. We speak from lived experience. We engage with empathy to build brave spaces. We agree to confidentiality. We build trust through inclusion and accept our presence as a participation. We acknowledge harm when harm is done and practice self-care to respond to difficult conversations, feelings, and ideas. We acknowledge positive and hard work, providing affirmations and feedback when appropriate or helpful. If you have agreements that you would like to add to this practice, please enter them in the chat. Now we will begin to discuss further what engaged pedagogy is. Our belief is that education is freedom. What must change about the classroom for education to be liberatory for every student who comes through our doors or into our Zoom? I had a teacher once start a practice with me. We had a mindfulness practice similar to the one that I had. We made our agreements for conduct, and then we shared our social location. We shared things based on privilege and power. We didn't share our privilege and proximity to power as a way of one-upping one another, but as a way of acknowledging the dynamics in the room and addressing how power works in the classroom so that each student and teacher is aware of our embodiment and what we bring into our practice together. If you notice, early in this lecture, I said, I am a white disabled woman. I've shared my position of power. I have shared a position of oppression, and we hold space for the intersection of identities. Hooks lets us know that it is not enough to put herself, Toni Morrison, Michelle Obama, Tricia Hersey into our learning materials or in our syllabus. If we are not to address how race and systems of power profoundly influence the decisions and importance of these authors, the inclusion of their work, the depth of their writing, students have to know why it is important to know that Walt Whitman was a white man and Bell Hooks was a Black woman. Colorblindness does not heal our world of racism. Colorblind teaching does not put an end to racism, just like male-dominated, male-orienting teaching does not put an end to sexism or heterosexism. We must address and acknowledge power structures in our classroom and teach accordingly. Hooks urges us to hold space for the questions, considerations, and feelings that our students will bring to these difficult conversations. And we must not allow our status as educators, no matter how many accolades we have, to keep us separate and distant from our learners. We are learning together, and we are shaping the world together. In order to break down systems of power that disenfranchise others and oppress people, we must cultivate a classroom of liberatory education. This means addressing how the authoritarian teacher, shedding light on disengagement and disembodiment of a compliant student who never asks a question, never fidgets, and does not take up space, is likely in a fixed, trapped learning position. That is not liberatory education. Rather, a power dynamic based on a system of educational banking where the teacher hands out information, the student copies the information, the student gives the information back to the teacher cashes in this new check with a grade. A compliant student feels embarrassed or shamed and does not feel safe to include and support each other in the face of a dictatorial teacher. But the triumph of liberatory pedagogy is that we create space for students to question their values and choose to align or disalign from one another in the face of oppression. It is difficult to change existing structures from within because of the habits within our bodies. Habits pull back and draw us closer to the authoritarian status quo. Hook says this leaves a student confused between their body, torn between the mind and spirit. Students often in the authoritarian classroom are waiting from the reward from the dictator teacher, which undermines liberatory pedagogy. According to Paulo Freire, it is impractical that we maintain hope even when the harshness of reality may suggest the opposite. Hook's words. Paulo taught us that in order for the oppressed to truly become their authentic selves, they need to fight for more than just freedom from hunger. They must fight for the freedom to create, explore, wonder, and take risks. So in the liberatory classroom, radical ideas are not enough to make change, but embodied practice, risk, mindfulness, and storytelling may prove more effective in creating a free space. It is essential to allow students to talk about their experience. Hook's classroom says to make room for personal narrative to connect to academic material. We allow our students to speak from immediate lived experiences to create a chance for students to claim personal knowledge bank from which they can exchange ideas firsthand. They may use this opportunity of personal narrative to strategically speak freely on race, class, sex, and gender from their personal knowledge bank. A unique challenge of teaching to transgress is approaching new pedagogical practices that teach our students to listen to one another, not in competition with, not in robotic response to, but to truly listen, to hear and engage without dialectical tension. This calling may be one of the most challenging requests Hooks makes in the book. For if we as teachers are not self-actualized and do not listen with full hearing, how can we encourage and support our students to hold space and be uncomfortable in learning and listening to their peers? We cannot forget that there are students in our classroom and teachers in our hallways who do not want to hear learn, or talk about race, sex, gender, or class. 30 years ago, Hooks used the word multiculturalism. Today, we employ the word diversity in the classroom. I have a question. After reading this book and listening to this lecture, how much have you seen or felt change between multiculturalism in the classroom 30 years ago and diversity initiatives of today? What may still be lacking or hiding behind fancy words, marketing, and politics? Activity question. What are some examples of how authority and dominance play out in your classroom? What are some ways to appropriately address these issues? Example answer. Hooks discusses how authority and dominance can manifest in the classroom in various ways, such as through the use of language and power play, as well as through societal structures like racism and sexism. In order to appropriately address these issues, Hooks suggests that teachers engage in critical self-reflection, establishing communities of teaching and learning that prioritize solidarity and equal participation. We must prioritize the needs and experiences of our students, engaging in critical thinking, social transformation, and listening. Final question. What practices can teachers engage in to become more mindful of their embodiment in the classroom? How can you, as a teacher, address power structures in the classroom and teach accordingly? What must change about your classroom for education to be liberatory for every student? Teachers must actively commit to a process of self-actualization that promotes their own well-being. To educate is the practice of freedom, writes Hooks. It is a way of teaching anyone can learn. Teaching to transgress is the record of one gifted teacher's struggle to make classrooms work in an age of multiculturalism, or justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Thank you.